We're going to cover the top 5 illegal performance enhancing drugs used by Olympic weightlifters, and we're going to start right now. What's up, everybody? It's Dane Miller from GarageStrength.com, and if this is your first time to the channel and you're looking to become a better athlete, you want to get more explosive, you want to be stronger, you don't want to take steroids, make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you ring that notification bell so we can help you become a champion. So we know in the sport of Olympic weightlifting, we've dealt with a lot of drug busts, a lot of drug usage, especially since 2008. And this has happened for a lot of different reasons. A lot of countries that might be smaller, that might have a whole bunch of nationalism behind them, find it a little bit easier to find success and pay off different elite level leaders inside of the IWF. And that has led to a whole bunch of success for these smaller countries. And so what I wanted to do is, after we released our Ilya Ilin video and why I believe he tends to be overrated, is I actually wanted to look at all of the different data backing all the way up to 2008 until our present day. We had one of our own athletes here at Garage Strength, Hao Huang, break down all of the different drug busts, who got popped for what, and what the most popular steroids were in these different drug busts. And what this can do for us is, one, it can help us specifically analyze what are male weightlifters taking, what are female lifters taking, and then we can take another step further and say, all right, what countries are getting popped more frequently than other countries? We can mine deep into all the different data that we've collected over the last 12 plus years and analyze what are these top drugs and why are people taking them. And so what we've done is we've put together those top 5 performance enhancing drugs that weightlifters have been busted for, and we're trying to analyze, is it cost? Is that why they're taking these specific drugs? Or is it for just how well that they perform when they're on these different drugs, to try and figure out, one, why they're picking these drugs, but two, who are the popular people who have been busted in the past? It's important to realize that when someone tests positive, there might be a whole bunch of different derivatives. So you might be taking oral turinabol, but you might pop for another form of testosterone. And you might be taking D-bol, and that might get you popped for that type of testosterone along with something else. What ends up happening is that the drug bust can be a little bit confusing, but we've done a pretty good job of analyzing these top 5 and sitting there and saying, like, all of these specific types of pops go into this different area. And so that takes us to our number 5 drug, and that is Oxandrolone. And so Oxandrolone is an androgen and anabolic steroid, and it is used primarily when someone is under a long period of corticosteroid therapy. So a lot of people who are struggling with AIDS, with HIV, that are under prolonged issues where they struggle to maintain a healthy body weight, are actually prescribed Oxandrolone. And so the popular name for Oxandrolone is Anavar. And this is also a drug, although this is specific to men, this list is specific to men, Anavar is very popular for women because it is relatively safe as a performance enhancing drug. And if we can think about who uses this, who has been popped that's very, very popular. And back in 2013, there was an Azerbaijani weightlifter who tested positive for this drug and another drug. He ended up switching countries, and by 2016, he won the Olympics, and his name is Nijat Rahimov. And if you can remember, Rahimov ended up beating Liu Xiaojun on his last attempt, taking this huge jump in the clean and jerk to come from behind and sweep that gold. But he tested positive for 2 different drugs, and Oxandrolone was one of those in 2013. And when we're looking at Oxandrolone, we've had a total of 11 different weightlifters test positive for this specific drug. So a lot of lifters know what Anavar is, they know what Oxandrolone is, but it's definitely not as prominent as some of the other performance enhancing drugs that we're going to be analyzing on this list. So coming at number 4 for the androgen and anabolic steroid is going to be Nandrolone. And so what is Nandrolone? This is something that is a drug that was created specifically for people with osteoporosis. People that have severe arthritis might be prescribed Nandrolone because it can really help build up collagen in the joints. It can help ligament improvements. It can help somebody who's suffering from a bicep tear or anything along these lines. This is also a drug that's utilized for people who might have been burned in a fire or anything along those lines, and their skin is suffering from their 3rd-degree burns, and a doctor might prescribe Nandrolone to help them heal their skin. Another aspect that it's currently being used for is in conjunction with therapeutic testosterone usage. So it is a relatively safe anabolic steroid, but it also has a huge component in the sport of Olympic weightlifting. If we can think about the sport, it's about lifting as much weight as you possibly can. So you have to go through a lot of different training. You have to go under a lot of different stress. You're constantly doing back squats, you're front squatting, you're snatching, you're clean and jerking, you're doing lifts that can beat up your body because they're technical. You've got to do them over and over and over again. So your knees might hurt, your elbows, your shoulders, your hips. Now you start taking a drug like Nandrolone and your joints start to feel really good. And this is a drug that's also popular amongst bodybuilders because it can help increase their volume in training so that they can handle a whole bunch more volume and not get banged up. So specific to Nandrolone, we've had 13 different positive tests since 2008. So not a ton of different people have tested positive for this. And keep in mind, out of this list, we've had over 400 different positive drug tests, but a lot of them have tested positive for multiple different drugs. And on top of that, they might test positive for a really random drug, and then they'll test positive for a really popular drug that are gonna be down in those top 3 spots. But Nandrolone has had 13 different positive tests since 2008. Now, what is that popular name? That popular name for Nandrolone, what you'll hear bodybuilders refer to as DECA. Okay, so somebody might be taking DECA and D-ball. That's like the ultimate stack from the 70s. And DECA is actually Nandrolone. So now we can go into who's tested positive for Nandrolone. Halil Mutlu. So Halil Mutlu is one of the greatest Olympic weightlifters of all time. He tested positive for DECA back in the mid-2000s when he was trying to heal from a bicep tear. Along with Polish lifter Marcin Dawinga, he also tested positive for Nandrolone later on in his career, and he's won multiple different world level medals. So a lot of popular lifters have utilized Nandrolone in the past. And again, we got to think about specific to Nandrolone. This is a drug that's going to help weightlifters get more volume. When they get more volume, they can improve their skill. If they can improve their skill, they're going to be more precise with their movement, and that's going to help them lift more weights. That's going to help them mentally. That's going to help them with their confidence when they're on the platform. And that's why it's banned from competition. And that is also going to lead us into our 3rd ranked performance enhancing steroid. And that 3rd ranked PED is going to be chlorodehydromethyl testosterone. So this is where we're going to start to see a lot of Olympic weightlifters start to use these things. And I believe these top 3 drugs, because they're so easy to take, they're so easily accessible, and a lot of these Eastern Bloc countries, we see drugs like chlorodehydromethyl testosterone being used pretty prominently because they're affordable, they're cheap, they're easy to get at the pharmacy. In most of these countries, you don't need a prescription to get these drugs. You can walk in, you can buy a pack, and you can just pop the pill. You don't need to inject. You don't need to do anything along those lines. But the other downside is that a lot of these drugs that tend to be oral are also a lot more dangerous. But again, these drugs are typically going to be also purchased by their coach, by their national governing body, and that's where the corruption comes into play. Now, we've measured about 45 different lifters since 2008 have tested positive for chlorodehydromethyl testosterone. And so what is that popular name? That popular name is going to be oral turinabol. So oral turinabol is a different form of another drug that's extremely popular amongst bodybuilders and Olympic weightlifters. And this tends to be very, very popular. You gotta think 45 plus people have tested positive for this. But who out of those 45 have used chlorodehydromethyl testosterone? Ilya Ilin is that #1 guy. So he is someone who has tested positive for this performance enhancing drug. And again, I believe a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's easily accessible, it's easy to use. So coming at that #2 spot, we're going to have Metandion. A lot of people might also just refer to this as Meton. And so this is a very, very potent steroid. It's very popular. And the other crazy aspect here is that Metandion, along with chlorodehydromethyl testosterone, were created by the exact same Eastern German pharmacy, okay? So there's a lot of history behind these drugs. The Eastern Germans were using CDMT here pretty consistently, and this was a drug, oral turinabol was a drug that was pretty hard to really test for up until the mid 2010s. But now that takes us into Meton, and Meton we've had over 73 different people test positive. But what exactly would that street drug be? If we can think about it, this is arguably one of the most popular drugs out there. Everybody who's been involved with sports has heard the term D-ball. People have always discussed about how potent D-ball is. I remember being in college and working as a bouncer and knowing all these different meathead bouncers who would take D-ball, and in 12 to 16 weeks, they'd gain 25 pounds of muscle. Now, they'd cycle off and they'd look deflated, but that's where the potency comes in. And a lot of Olympic lifters in the past have taken D-ball when they're leading into that peak. They'll just get on a ton of gear, and they might take D-ball along with Nandrolone and start to really build up and hit that big peak and hit these outrageous numbers. So who can we think about who's tested positive for D-ball? If we think about in the mid 2010s to 2015, 2016, Vasily Palavnikov, he was doing lectures around the country in the United States. He's a really good guy, and he has a really good perspective on technique, but he did test positive for D-ball. So that's one pretty serious downside from a lot of these Russian, Eastern European. There's a lot of different countries that are testing positive for these drugs, and we've got to be aware of it. So before we get into that #1 drug, I think it's important as a coach to take that step back and to educate yourself on these steroids, to educate why are they using them, first of all. Second of all, is there anything that we can do as coaches? For something like Nandrolone, we can think about, all right, our lifters that get tested by USADA all the time can't take these drugs, and they shouldn't, because these drugs can put them at a health risk long term. It's not necessary. We're talking about sport. For what reason do we want to put serious long-term health problems onto somebody just so that they can lift a lot of weight? That's one of the big downsides here, is that we got to put our whole life into context. Okay, so it's important to educate on what these drugs do, try to figure out some natural way. So if we can think about with Nandrolone, hey, let's supplement with glucosamine, let's supplement with collagen, let's try and decrease volume, let's try and do mobility work, let's try and work on stability issues, let's do some more bodybuilding so that we can make sure that the joint integrity is healthy so that they can handle the volume from all the different training. And then most of these other drugs, okay, are going to be focused on serious amounts of muscle protein synthesis. So when you're taking D-ball or when you're taking Anavar, these are all drugs that are sort of offshoots of testosterone. And if testosterone's higher, we know that muscle protein synthesis is going to be higher. So from a health perspective, instead of taking drugs, let's try and educate our lifters to get better night's rest. Let's try and educate them to do mobility, to do yoga, to eat clean, to make sure they're getting enough whey protein, to make sure they're eating enough protein in their diet to maximize that muscle protein synthesis. Let's make sure that their nutrient timing is on point. And that's the big key factors here, is that we've got to understand there's ways around this. We're never going to create somebody naturally to be as strong as some of these guys who've taken the gas for a very long period of time. But we can find ways to achieve pretty impressive levels of human performance without using performance enhancing drugs. And that's a key component to getting our weightlifting sport back to where it used to be, to being a healthy sport that the IOC actually takes seriously, so that we can stop losing different spots going to the Olympics. So we need to try to stop the usage of performance enhancing drugs by educating ourselves, and instead of pretending that these drugs aren't out there, know what they are, know who uses them, and know why they use them, so that we can become better coaches. So that leads us into our number one performance enhancing drug, and that is going to be known as stenazolol. So again, stenazolol is a pretty popular drug. It's well known throughout the world of fitness. It's well known for figure competitors to take it. It's easily accessible, it's pretty affordable, and it's easy to take. It's another oral, but it can have a pretty negative impact on blood lipids and on liver enzymes and on renal function. So it can have a pretty negative impact on the human body. Now, 84 different lifters tested positive since 2008 for stenazolol, and that includes multiple different tests for specific people. What would that popular name be? So if we've ever heard of Winstrol, okay, and this is a drug, Winstrol, otherwise you might hear it on the street, Winnie. This is a drug that was also used very, very heavily inside horse racing. So it's very popular for performance enhancement in multiple different sports, not just in human sports, but also in equine sports performance. So who is one of the most prominent male weightlifters to test positive for stenazolol? Lasha. Lasha tested positive for stenazolol the last year that he was still competing as a junior, in 2013, I believe it was, and he came back to compete after his 2-year ban in 2015. So this is still a prominent drug that has been used by even today's weightlifters. So we've got to be aware that it is still out there, and we've got to educate our lifters to stay away from it, and instead to bust their butt, train hard, focus on the things that they can have a positive impact, eat well, sleep well, listen to your coach, follow that technical pattern that you need to be focusing upon, and at the end of the day, make sure that you're in the right system of periodization for you. So if you want more information about Olympic weightlifting, you can head over to garagestrength.com, and if you don't want to take performance enhancing drugs, you can pick up your parabolic periodization book and course so that you don't need drugs to be a beast Olympic weightlifter. If you want more information about Olympic weightlifting in a video, you can click on this card right here. Until next time, guys, peace.